donk, donk, donk. Straight wheel. What is the heart and soul of the 12-volt system all about? It's this isolator, guys. This is an older one I bought years ago as a spare backup to the one I keep in the van. The one in the van was a little heavier duty, and they had this one sitting next to it at the store for half price off because it was low amp. Everybody wanted 150 plus amps for their isolators for their big RVs. They didn't want these little ones, so I got this one on sale for half price. Why an isolator versus a switch or a relay? What's the purpose of this? What am I talking about? When you're driving down the road, your alternator is charging the battery, okay, for the vehicle. But when you stop and you want to use televisions, laptops, or any of this other stuff, you don't want to destroy or tear up your starting battery. Your starting battery is not designed to be a deep cycle battery. It's not designed for that, okay? Don't do deep cycling with a starter battery. You'll ruin it quick. So what this device here does is it allows the alternator, instead of charging up to just this battery, it'll charge up to this coil. One of these is an exciter coil starter. You guys can read about that later if you get into this particular brand. But this goes on this terminal, and then it splits out to charge these two. Okay, battery number one is this one. That is the one you want charged first. It takes precedence. That is the starter battery for the vehicle. Okay, if your house batteries go dead and you can't use your laptop or your TV or your cell phone, you can still get where you're going. But if this battery goes dead, you got problems, you got trouble. So you take the alternator feed and you go to the isolator, and then battery number one is the starter battery, and then this back terminal here is battery number two. You run that under the truck. You get a big thick 4-gauge wire, you run that back to charge the house batteries. Two big giant deep cycles, big old marine RV deep cycle batteries. I don't know if you can read that on there from here, but they're 210 RC batteries I bought at the auto parts store. Two of them. They probably won't run an electric blanket all night. They probably won't run any kind of conductive or inductive heaters. Electric heaters, they won't. Okay, if you need heat, I recommend the Mr. Buddy products. You know, do some propane. We'll make a video about that. But if you use propane heat and or don't need heat, then the only thing you're doing with your electricity is possibly one of these new low draw Foss style compressor refrigerators, and they're super efficient. So I do believe that two deep cycle batteries will handle that. But I'm not even running that. I just use regular coolers because I'm only on the road for 2 or 3 days at a time. I'm not living out of this thing. I just use it for weekend trips. So I just take a cooler. I'm not even going to run a refrigerator. But, you know, for those of you that do need that, it'll handle up to that. If you want to get into other heating systems and all that, because you're living in the thing in the wintertime, you know, look into diesel heaters. That's the way to go there. I'm not doing it, but for your purposes, that's what I would do if I was you, if you're living in your truck. But I'm not living in this one. This one's just a weekend jaunter. All right, guys, back to the 12-volt setup. So what I got to do on this particular vehicle, this particular Toyota, is I got to find out where the alternator feeds up and into the charging system of the vehicle. So is this wire here coming up right there, this big one, is that from the alternator, and then this one's feeding the fuse box, or what is this other wire back there? Where's that coming from? That's also leading down to the wiring harness that goes into the truck. So what I'm going to try to do with my voltmeter is figure out which one of these is coming from the alternator and which one of these is feeding just the fuse block. And I think the answer is obvious as we look at it. That's going to a fuse block, right? So, and this one is coming straight out of the harness without a fuse block. So I'm assuming ASSUME, make an ass out of you and me, that this is the alternator charging. But it could also be for the starter because it's also going down under the truck. So if that's the big one they use for the starter from the battery, which also makes sense, then this one could be the one coming off the alternator. So how do I figure that out? Well, I disconnect one at a time and see which one doesn't start anymore and which one doesn't charge anymore. So let's get that done. And then the next thing to do is find a nice safe place for this isolator to go. How about we put it right there? No? Don't fit there? Okay, sorry. Alright, jokes aside, we gotta figure out, I mean, it'd be nice if I had a metal plate off the bottom of that battery to just kind of put it there, but I don't. So I'm thinking, you know, wow, this is more of a challenge than I considered. I got to figure out a place to put this isolator, guys. It wasn't so bad in the Chevy van, because in the Chevy van I had a bunch of space up on the core and I just went behind the core next to the radiator, but I don't have that room here on this Toyota. So I'm gonna have to figure something out or make something to have a place to put this thing. Okay guys, I found that this battery tray was extra wider than it needed to be. So I had about 2 inches I could go, or 1.5 inches I could go to the towards the passenger side with the battery, and that gave me enough room to get that isolator tucked away back there. So I can mount it there. Now what's going to happen is when I do this strap bar and I put that hook in down there, we're going to have to finagle. So that strap bar is going to sit right about there, and that's designed to go between the two caps. So we're going to have to move this nut here over. Otherwise we're going to be clamping on a cap and not fitting down on the battery flat, which is not good. So I'm just going to drill a hole in this support, put a nut underneath, and instead of having a nut welded in there, I'll just have, you know, manually do a nut underneath. But that's how I'm going to solve that problem. That'll buy me the space I need. So that's everything I love in a modification. It costs no money, it costs extremely little time, and it's safe and effective and works with the equipment that you have without causing problems. Alright, now to evaluate, let's get this out of the way before we short anything out, pop any fuses. To evaluate whether this is the alternator cable, which I doubt, because see how thick it is? I'm guessing that's starter. And this is the alternator cable, which I suspect it is. I removed it from that terminal right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the truck and make sure that it still starts, which means my starter's hooked up, and verify that my charging went, you know, away, which would mean that is the alternator cable, the proper one I need for the isolator. So let's see what happens when I start the truck. Hopefully nothing catches on fire or explodes. Just joking. Here we go. I'm hoping to see no charging and a good start. I got nothing. I got a dead truck. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that cable is what feeds the power back to the fuse. And it's not just coming up out of the harness. So with that wire, this is what feeds the truck. So this must be the cable that the alternator is coming up from. Yeah, there we go. Yep, see that? This is the one that powers the truck. We just got sparks because the door lamp and the beepers came on. All right, I'm going to put that back and pull this one. We're going to assume that one's the one for the alternator. So let me reverse all that and try again. Okay, guys, so this wire here is feeding the fuses. This wire here was coming up from the alternator to that side of this ABS sensor style fuse. So what I did was I put the isolator in between this wire and where it goes on these two terminals, because that's the alternator feed and that's battery 1. Now I didn't get any charging when I did that, and I thought, uh-oh, I got bad parts, something's wrong. But then I remembered some of these exciter coils need to be excited with 12 volts before they work. So this coil here is an exciter that has to be fed 12 volt hot, okay? Otherwise the isolator can't work. This basically is the power for the isolator. That's not true. That's not scientifically correct. You guys that know electrical engineering could hash me to pieces on that, but you could think of that as the on button. It has to have 12 volts to power this device. So now what's happening is 14 volts is coming up from the alternator right here, and then going to battery number 1 first. How do I know it's going to battery number 1 first? Well, because I got 13.6 volts on battery number 1. This is battery number 2 back here. 14.1. See that? Why is it that I'm getting slightly less on 13.4 on battery 1 and 14.0 or 14.1, 13.9 on battery 2? Reason for that is it knows battery 1 is charged. It knows, because it has a voltmeter built into it. So when battery 1 is really low, which I'm not doing that, it's bad for a starting battery. I'm not doing it just to show you guys, but just take my word for it. If battery 1 got low, say you left the door open and all the lights on and it got really low, but it barely started the truck, or maybe you even had to jump the truck, it'll throw more of the amperage from the alternator into the starter battery first. Get this fully recovered, and after this is fully recovered, like it is now because it's not drained, and it sees good numbers on it, like 12.8 is good numbers on a running car, at idle. 13.5 is if it's revving up. So you see 13.6 coming out of the alternator. Well, if 13.6 is coming out of the alternator, how come only 12.6 is going to this battery? Because it's fully charged. Let's see where the other volt is going. Oh, it's going to battery bank number 2. See, that's over 13 volts now. So the system knows what it's doing. It's looking to take care of the starting battery first, and then it's throwing the excess amperage to the house batteries back here once I wire them in. So everything's working great. Isolator's it's working fine. You can see where I made my little cheap jumper lead for my exciter, and it's not mounted properly. I just got it laying in there to test it. So everything's working good. Let's make sure we didn't throw any check engine lights or alternator lights. Nope. Alternators, see the alternator flexing? See that? That's because it's charged and it's not taking much. Watch that alternator meter when I hit the gas. It comes up a little bit. Here, watch this when I hit the fan motor. See that? It's got to be on the gas a little bit, but it'll come up. And I got no check engine light, so I'm satisfied that this is the correct way to wire this isolator, and I'm going to go ahead and physically bolt it in and get all that done. All right, guys.